Heretic is a recently released A24 movie that came out November 8th. It is an hour and 51 minutes long, rated R horror film about the concept of two Mormons who are going door to door, and they get invited inside by a stranger named Mr. Reed and end up in a game of cat and mouse about questioning their lives, their choices, and their religion. Question everything. The movie is about critical thinking. It's about analyzing and taking things apart. And that's what we love to do here on our show, because we think it's fun to take the things that we care about and delve deeper into them to give more meaning to it and kind of decipher what the artist meant for us to take from it. There's just things about him that just aren't quite right and are off in the whole first act. So this movie does such a good job of building that anticipation in its audience members, making them wonder what is just not right, or if his wife exists, and puts you perfectly in the shoes of Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East's characters, because they don't feel safe to leave. Welcome to Backseat Directing, where we talk about movies, TV shows, comics, and more. I'm your host, Andrew, today without Aaron, and I'm going to be doing a solo review on the movie Heretic that just came out this last weekend. Thanks so much for watching. 3, 2, 1, action. All right, that felt a little weird. This is our first episode with a solo review. We've had one episode that I was not in, that one of our guests, Justin, joined Aaron to film, but this will be the first one where I'm filming by myself. So comment below to let us know how you feel about this concept and how you feel about this movie if you've seen it. Heretic is a recently released A24 movie that came out November 8th. It is an hour and 51 minutes long, rated R horror film about the concept of two Mormons who are going door to door, and they get invited inside by a stranger named Mr. Reed and end up in a game of cat and mouse about questioning their lives, their choices, and their religion. It is a very interesting, original horror concept brought to us, like I said, by A24. The movie so far, I believe, has grossed worldwide only $16 million. This is in only having one weekend of being out so far. Generally, R-rated, low-budget horror movies don't perform that high, so this is not really too far out of expectations. It's also very specific taste. I'll get a little bit more into the religious components of this movie, but that certainly can turn away some viewers. I want to take this time at the very beginning of the episode to thank you for clicking on it and let you know that we appreciate you. Please make sure that you hit the like button, the notification bell, and the subscription button. It'll just take 3 seconds to hit those 3 buttons, and it helps us out so much. Now, let's get into talking about Heretic. So, this movie, it actually has a team, a pair for directors and writing. It was directed and written by Scott Beck and Brian Woods together on both of those roles. It stars Hugh Grant as Mr. Reed, Sophie Thatcher as Sister Barnes, and is it Chloe East, I believe? Chloe East as Sister Paxton. And then we randomly have their pastor in the movie being played by Topher Grace, who, if you don't know, is a star of That 70s Show, is Eric Foreman. He's Venom in Spider-Man 3. He's in this movie for like 2 seconds, so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I would not come to this movie for Topher Grace if you haven't seen the movie, because he is very minuscule screen time in this movie. But what really interests me about this movie is the religious themes. So if you are into that sort of thing, if you like religious horror, especially grounded religious horror, because I'll spoil this for you, the movie does not have a whole lot of supernatural elements to it. They allude to it, but it's really very grounded horror movie in concept. And if you're not into that sort of thing, this movie may not work for you. But I think it really worked for me. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd. And the reason being that the concept of this movie, although it's in the framework of religion, what it's actually about is exactly what the tagline of the movie says: question everything. The movie is about critical thinking. It's about analyzing and taking things apart. And that's what we love to do here on our show, because we think it's fun to take the things that we care about and delve deeper into them to give more meaning to it and kind of decipher what the artist meant for us to take from it. And this movie, I don't think paints religion out in necessarily a negative light. I would say you could see that on the surface level. I could see someone having that opinion, but the villain of the movie is the one who is anti-religion. The heroes of our story, Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton, are the Mormons, are the religious individuals. And by the end of that movie, I think it's very clear that they not only are the protagonists that we follow, but the actual heroes of the story. They're the symbolic, surrogate audience members. They're the optimists. They're the ones that are being charged with a task in the movie with a challenge, which is to question everything. And our villain, our antagonist, Mr. Reed, is creating the obstacles and creating the problems in the story. So he can thematically be pointed out as the bad guy of the movie. But that being said, even as the villain, the reason I found him so intriguing is because he makes so many interesting analytical points about religion in general. So I'll talk a little bit about religion here. Me, personally, I would identify as an agnostic leaning atheist. And I think that that maybe makes me more likely of a person to like this kind of movie. And it's not just that as well. It's my personal predilections for film and art and media. I like things that are darker. I like things that are analytical and thought pieces. And this movie is just that. You're going to get some shock value in there. There's a small handful of jump scares, but mostly what this movie brings to the table is what I love in horror movies is thrills, tension. It brings you to the edge of your seat and makes you wonder. There's a ton of dialogue, especially in the first act of the movie. There's uneasiness. Basically, the Mormons come to the door of Mr. Reed because he has checked off a box somewhere along the line in the past that he was interested in getting more information about Mormonism or the Jesus Christ Church of Latter-day Saints as they've been rebranded. So they come to his door, he invites them inside, and they say, "We can't come inside unless there's a woman present. Is your wife home?" And he says, "Yes, she's in the back making a pie, but she can come out shortly." So they come inside and sit down, but there's a bunch of dialogue. The entire first act, they're sitting there thinking that his wife is in the kitchen and making a blueberry pie, but they don't know that the wife does not exist. And every little element in the story, such as the wife, is a metaphor for different religions, different religious practices throughout history. Things like as simple as him saying that the wife is in the kitchen cooking a pie and lying and the wife not actually existing could be seen as a metaphor for Mr. Reed's views on God. He asked them later on in the story, further into the second act, when they ask if his wife could just come out, he says, "I could go talk to her, but if you still believe that she's back there at this point making a pie, I think you're basically letting my point explain itself. Why do you believe she's back there? Because someone told you she was there? Because you have no evidence that she's back there, and everything in your instinct is leading you to believe that she's not back there, except for the fact that it is more comforting to believe that she is back there making a pie. And that makes you inclined to go against all your other instincts because you want to feel safe and secure." And that is certainly one argument that a lot of people make against religion is the idea of comfort and security. And this movie challenges a lot of those beliefs, which I find really interesting. I think we all should be open to having our beliefs challenged. No matter, I described my beliefs earlier, I think there is always reason to question things, because if you're not questioning them, then how can you be proud of what you believe if it can't stand up to scrutiny, is basically what I'm trying to say. So I think that this movie does a great job of Mr. Reed applying all those metaphors, and then his metaphors about iterations when it comes to him breaking out the Monopoly game. So he breaks out the Landlord's game, which is the original iteration of Monopoly. He breaks out original Monopoly and then future versions like Monopoly Bankruptcy or futuristic versions of Monopoly that they put twists on to make them more exciting for new viewers. And he aligns those to the Judeo-Christian beliefs, to the big three religions, as he calls them, to Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And then even aligning it further to the Church of Latter-day Saints and Mormonism with, what he calls kind of plucky and modernized, revamped version of the game / religion. So he makes a lot of interesting points, and whether they're right or wrong, I think, is besides the point. I think the interesting thing about his points is that it creates good questions and creates good conversations. Looking at similarities between different religions, between Hindu gods and their origins, Egyptian gods and their origins, and its relation to the stories that would later be told about Jesus Christ himself. I think that it begs questions that we should be asking. It encourages critical thinking about different religious concepts, but it basically draws us into this sense of unease because, in general, these are uncomfortable conversations that a lot of people don't like to have. And that's why it's so fitting for a horror movie, because you feel uneasy. You feel nervous that his wife's not coming out. You feel nervous that he's questioning the religion that they're sent door to door to preach. It's an uneasy conversation, uneasy topics that make you feel like something's just a little bit off. And also his approach to things. He'll turn on a whim, or small details in the house like the lights being on a timer switch suddenly it's dark. You know, darkness obviously incites fear of the unknown, and there's just things about him that just aren't quite right and are off in the whole first act. So this movie does such a good job of building that anticipation in its audience members, making them wonder what is just not right, or if his wife exists, and puts you perfectly in the shoes of Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East's characters because they don't feel safe to leave. So now everything boils to a head in this story when they attempt to sneak out and the door will not open. And now they know something is definitively wrong. But even with presented with the evidence that something is amiss, they still cling to the hope that his wife is in the back, that maybe even though it's unusual that his door locks are set on a timer, even though this is something no one's ever heard of before, because he's trying to highlight to them the principle of control, the principles of fear, and the principles of understanding the human mind, and how if you understand the human mind, you can use that to determine a person's actions or even manipulate and control a person's actions. And that's what he does to them. I mean, he incites them to leave the living room and come further and further into his house. He incites them to play along with his game. He incites them to go through these doors that they know lead down into a dark basement. I mean, despite the fact that he misleads them and tells them that my house is on a hill, so to go ut, you must go dun. Despite the fact that he misleads them with that, they know he's lying at that point. And they're still because of the manipulation of fear, because of the fear that even 2 against 1, they're not strong enough to take him over, they play his game anyway. And through his eyes, through the eyes of Mr. Reed, the villain, and what makes him so interesting, through his eyes, the game is religion itself. It's a bet you make with yourself. You know, you bet that you're right, and then when you pass on, or later in your life, when you hope to seek the rewards of living your life in a good way, you're betting in this game that you will have some sort of reward. And in the same way, the girls are betting that if they understand him and that if they make the best possible choice in this scary situation, that they can come out with a positive outcome in the end. There's just so many good, amazing metaphors in this movie, from the different iterations of music he talks about, to music repeating itself, to stories repeating themselves throughout history, whether religious or not, to even board games. The board game example, I think, is going to grow to be, maybe it won't be super mainstream, but I think that'll be in the cult circle of people who enjoy this movie. I think it'll be iconic to them in their memory of a concept of iterations of things repeating themselves, because stories do repeat themselves. I think English teachers say that there's something like 20 or so different versions of a story to tell, and we in media just repeat those different iterations of those same 20 storylines. Even going back to the days of Shakespeare. So what happens next in the story? Let's go into the second act. Mr. Reed takes Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton into the back room of his house, which kind of mimics like, it has pews. It kind of mimics like a church setting, but he has all these many, many texts on the walls. He's got music. We can assume he's been studying religion for years, which goes further into the psychosis of his character, that earlier in the movie, he was pretending not to know the names of founders of Mormonism, when in reality, he has the Book of Mormon with so much, writing and text from him in there. He's got tons of sticky notes and highlighting on there. So he's extensively studied every religion, and he talks about that in the second act. But he's gone to the psychotic level of showmanship and lying to convince them that he's just a fledgling interest of a fledgling interest in Mormonism. So he brings them into this back room where they're become now very uneasy because they've seen the candle that made them realize that he does not have a wife in the back cooking a pie, but he left that candle there on purpose to show them more evidence to question what's going on. And he writes on the 2 doors leading down into the dark cellar. He writes belief on one and disbelief on the other. So I also want to talk about, in the context of this choice, the different characterization of our 2 female leads, which are really the leads of the story, Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton. Sister Barnes is the more analytical of the 2. She's a dark-haired character played by Sophie Thatcher. She's the more analytical, the more questioning, the more she pushes back more. So she's more of that self-assured, outspoken personality. She challenges him when she doesn't have to, whereas Sister Paxton, played by Chloe East, she is more of a people pleaser. And that's not to discount her intelligence, because the first act or even 2 acts of the movie would go to have us believe that she is less intelligent of the two, whereas the 3rd act will come around and show us that she's actually very attentive, observant, and intelligent in her own way. She just her personality tends to hide that because she's more of a people pleaser. We tend to hear the loudest voice in the room more often, and she's more quiet and she goes with the flow more. So we see Sister Paxton wanting to go through the door of disbelief because she is a people pleaser and wants to believe that she believes that that is what Mr. Reed wants the 2 of them to do. He wants them to believe, she believes that he wants them to think that he's converted them against their own religion, and if they do what makes him happy, they will come out unscathed. But Sister Barnes believes that he's just studying them, and regardless of what door they go through, they may not survive the scenario. So she urges Paxton to go through the door of belief. She says, "Sister Paxton, do you still believe in God?" And Paxton says yes. So they begrudgingly go through the door of belief, which at this point in the movie, like I said, has been very dialogue heavy and more just building tension, building suspense, which feels very Fincher-esque to me. I love the approach to, like, the Seven approach of building fear rather than just hitting us with jump scare after jump scare, like some modern horror movies like to do. And some people love that. It's just not my personal taste in horror movies. I don't watch a lot of those kind of movies. So we've built all the suspense. Now we're finally going to find out what's in the cellar. What do they find when they go down the stairs of belief? They find that the 2 doors of belief and disbelief go into the same cellar. And what does this tell us about Mr. Reed's psychology? Mr. Reed is somebody who I think is pretty evidently in this storyline anti-religious at this point. And what he's telling us through metaphor is whether you have belief or not, you're going to the same place. And on top of that, the stairs both going down tells us maybe that he believes that everyone is going to a dark place. Maybe he believes everyone is going to hell regardless of their beliefs, one way or the other, and that we can't be saved. Maybe it says something to do about his cynical view of humanity as a whole, and he looks down on humanity and thinks that we have a tendency towards the negative, a tendency towards being bad in our nature. Maybe even that's something inside of him that helps him excuse his own shortcomings and his own horrible acts, believing that all humans are bad and going to a bad place. Maybe he thinks that there's no point in living for the reward and being a good person because of that. Very cynical approach, but I think he's a cynical person. He treats people as a game. He treats people as pawns and experiments. I mean, even in the poster to the movie, you have little wood carvings of the 2 girls, because to him, they're like pieces on a board game. They're like chess pieces, pieces of Monopoly. And in a way, he's testing them, but in a way, he's playing with them. He doesn't see them as real people. Otherwise, he couldn't kill so many victims or jail so many victims without any remorse. So we're dealing with a remorseless, heartless character in Mr. Reed. But again, another aspect that makes him so interesting. So they both doors lead down to the same place. And what's down there? Nothing but a table. There's a glass ceiling with rain pattering on it, or snow, more likely, because the beautiful shots of the exteriors of the snow in this movie, it looks so good at every opportunity. I love the way that the outside is lit. It also creates this impending dread for the scenes that are shot inside, because I leaned over at some point during the theater to my fiance and said, what are they going to do if they get out of here? I mean, this was before they got their coats back, but even if they got out the door, they're walking out into a blizzard, freezing cold with no coats. We find out later that he even took their bikes. Even if they had their bikes, it creates this fear that they're trapped in this location. Regardless of if he unlocked the door, it makes them feel even more trapped because they would die if they went outside in the blizzard. So an awesome shots, but also cool story elements there as well. And then the lighting inside is gorgeous. And what they do with the lighting tricks, where the timer goes off and suddenly it's dark, they play with the lighting in a very interesting way. But they also take on really cool, exciting shots. There's some dynamic camera movement throughout this movie, where one of my favorites is the shot revealing that the candle is that blueberry pie candle, which of course we all knew from the trailer. But the camera has this arcing path that moves with the candle as it turns and unveils it just as it's unveiled to our characters from the front, showing that it's the blueberry pie scented candle and giving us that impending fear that everything that's been said to them so far has been a lie. So when they get down into that basement, it's empty but for a table, and we get that break off of that splinter of wood, that 2x4 with some nails in it. That'll come back full circle at the end of the movie. And Mr. Reed tells them that they're going to witness a miracle. This is where the movie almost lost me a little bit. I was sitting very high on this movie, enjoying the dialogue, enjoying the thrills, but he said, I'm going to introduce you to a prophet and I'm going to show you a miracle. The prophet will die and then be reborn. And that's what they do. They lay down a disgusting looking pie in front of this monstrous looking person with warts and all kinds of discoloration to their skin. She eats the pie, passes out dead, and he asks the girls to check for a pulse, and they do. No pulse is found. So the prophet is definitively dead. Now, I don't know how he planned this part, but the pastor from their church comes up and knocks on the door at this exact moment. The girls come running up the stairs to look underneath that little space between the doorway and the floor to see him leaving because they want a chance to try to escape. Now they've abandoned the dead body of the prophet, which sets up a perfect placement for Mr. Reed's plan. And if you got lost in the movie here, I'll explain what happened. He had another one of his captured victims sneak up from that hole in the floor, take the dead body of the prophet, throw it down into the hole in the floor, close it, and then they took the same position in the chair, face down in the pie, in the exact same outfit, to give the impression that the prophet would be dead and reborn, because they've actually replaced it with now living one of his victims. But when they replaced them, that person did not correctly remember the position of the dead body's face in the pie. She moved her face to the left when originally the dead body was to the right. So Sister Paxton picks up on this, and that's part of how she unveils the whole secret of what's been going on. Now, again, like I said, I don't understand how he planned this. Maybe he had some other plan in store to distract them and get them to come running up the stairs. But it just seemed by happenstance that this was the timing when the pastor came to the door. He couldn't have possibly planned for him to come up at this exact time. But like I said, maybe he had something else in store to try and trick them, lure them away from the body so he could make that switch. Because that's really important to his trick and his plot here, them not being anywhere near that body. And somehow they also silently made the switch where they dropped her down the well and opened that grate and came up, and it was over the table too. So it'd be really hard to do all of that silently. But that aside, very nitpicky stuff there. That's not what bothered me. What I said where they almost lost me was introducing these supernatural elements and also introducing the element of the character, the villain, who's been forcing them to question their beliefs, actually having scientifically, quote unquote, found a prophet and found a scientific guarantee of a miracle. It just seems weird that he would be testing it on these two random Mormons that he brought into his house as kidnap victims, instead of like showing it to the scientific community at large that he's found this miracle. But they brought it back full circle and brought it back into my enjoyment when they unveiled that this was all just part of his game to get them to question their beliefs, get them to question things and look analytically at things by showing them a false miracle, and it was all just a ploy and a plot. So when I thought it was actually supernatural, the movie probably would have lost a half a star to a star for me because it would have went a totally different direction. Not that supernatural horror isn't good in an entirety, it's just not what I had hoped for this movie. So I was really glad when they went back to that concept of just grounded, realistic horror. I mean, it's, realistic in the context of a movie. It's still pretty far out that all these things would happen, that he would have a bunch of caged people underneath the floorboards. Even just the design of his house is pretty far reaching, but it's interesting and exciting to the eye aesthetically. The design of the house and the set design for this movie is so strong. The stairway down to the cellar. He also hints at his wife, which I don't know what to make necessarily of that, but he says that his wife is the one who built this house. And in my mind, what I'm imagining throughout the movie is that his wife he did have a wife who potentially passed away. And that's when this character began to question religion, because he wondered maybe what kind of God would take his loved one from him. And that's when he began to enter into this dark world of pessimism and cynicism that would lead to the Mr. Reed that we saw on screen. That's just pure conjecture, and that's what I imagined for the character. It could be totally wrong. But he does allude to his wife outside of the context of making the pie. He alludes to her saying that she designed the house or made the house or something like that. So I think she would have been a real person at some point in time. Anyways, further into maybe the third act of the movie, Mr. Reed comes down and talks to the girls, and they do this exciting switcheroo here where they build up tension to Sister Barnes saying the code word, which the code word is supposed to have Sister Paxton stab Mr. Reed with a knife that they found in the room, unbeknownst to Mr. Reed. But just as she says the code word, we get a close-up of the throat slice. And it turns out to be Mr. Reed slicing Sister Barnes' throat with a box cutter. And man, isn't a box cutter just such a terrifying weapon? I feel like so at edge when I have a box cutter in my hand. Like, I don't want to accidentally cut myself. I don't want to cut whatever I'm trying to remove from the package by pushing too hard. I feel like they're just so razor sharp that they create a lot of anxiety. So I loved its use as a weapon here by Mr. Reed. I feel like it made my skin crawl a little bit to see a throat slash. Like I said, this movie doesn't have a lot of big jump scare moments, but it does have some gore. When it hits gore, it hits hard. He cuts out I think an IUD implant from Sister Barnes' arm and pulls it out. And when he's digging through her arm with his finger, he pulls a vein out of her arm, and it is great practical use of horror. That it absolutely looked like it was done real in camera, but it just makes your skin crawl the way he's digging around inside her arm. He does this. He pulls out after he kills her, he pulls out the IUD to try and do some kind of hodgepodge explanation to Sister Paxton to get back on track with his plan to see how much he can control her and manipulate her. He says that she's a robot, part of a simulation. What he's saying he actually believes in this context is simulation theory. And if you kind of lost him here, what simulation theory is the concept that our whole world is a makeup of numbers, ones and zeros, that we're all living within a simulation, and they believe that because of things like the Fibonacci sequence. The Fibonacci sequence is like this mathematical phenomenon where there's like a spiral pattern that is a matter of proportions, something to do with like prime numbers like 1 to 2 to 3 to 9 to 13. And these proportions, they say, make up a lot of things in our natural world. I think they also call it the golden ratio. This is all just off the top of my head, so don't necessarily quote me on this. But they say that we look for the golden ratio naturally with our eyes. We look for it in proportions on people's faces. People with proportionate faces are naturally seen as more attractive. And it appears naturally in nature with things like flowers and growth and animals. People say that this natural proportion occurs so much that it's proof that we live in a simulation. And a lot of, there is a group, segment of people that believe in simulation theory, but he's just using it here in the context of this story. Mr. Reed is using it as a misdirect. He's using it to try, it's more of a red herring, to try and throw off Sister Paxton and convince her, because he's trying to get back on track. One of his kidnap victims went off script. The quote unquote revived prophet comes to the girls and says, like, it's a lie or it's fake or something to that nature. And it's telling them that everything is a sham, but he's trying to distract. He's all smoke and mirrors. He's all showmanship and deception. But it doesn't work on Sister Paxton, because this is where we start to learn that she's actually very observant. And even in moments of extremely high stress and pressure and fear and danger, she is able to come to these conclusions that he's trying to trick her. She under her breath says to herself the words of Sister Barnes, question him, push back. And she starts doing that. She takes on Sister Barnes' role when she's gone and starts questioning her, or starts questioning him and Mr. Reed. And this pushback is what helps her get further into the game. You have to get further into his game, into his test to survive. You have to surprise him. If you show him exactly what he expects, or if you step on his toes too much outside of the questioning, you may just die, because we're dealing with a complete psychopath, sociopath here in Mr. Reed. He does not feel for other humans. He sees them as toys, like I said earlier. So as she questions him, she says that she understands his trick, and that he actually, what I explained earlier, that one of his victims came out from underneath the opening in the floor. She then opens it, and he says, there's only one way to test your hypothesis. You have to go down. And she goes further down into the dungeon, which we see another metaphor here in the story, because there's hung on the wall in Mr. Reed's little war room is Dante's 7 Circles of Hell. And what happens in Dante's Circles of Hell is you have to go further and further down to get out. So that's exactly what's happening here in this movie. So many great metaphors, I'm telling you guys. You have to watch it. If you're just watching this and you haven't seen it, you're doing yourself a little bit of a disservice, but you absolutely should watch it. So she goes further down, finds the dead body of the prophet, which proves her hypothesis that it was all a trick. Now, she has to go further and further because Mr. Reed closes the hatch and locks her down in there. And when she goes further down, she finds her bike lock on the door, which Mr. Reed had slid into Sister Paxton. He had removed from Sister Barnes' pocket and put in the coat pocket of Sister Paxton. And this is where she understands everything. I understand it now. When she opens the door, unlocks the bike lock, comes through the door, she comes to Mr. Reed and she says, I understand your message. You're showing me that the one true religion is control, that you were controlling us the whole time. I thought you put the key back mistakenly in my coat pocket, but Mr. Reed had put it back into her pocket on purpose to iterate to the two girls, or to iterate more specifically to Sister Paxton when she got to that point, that he had designed the entire course of events for that night, that he intended for her to be the only one there and for her to need that key to open that door because he had far earlier placed that lock and placed that key. So nothing had gone far enough outside his parameters to derail his plans. And she understands he's trying to say the one true religion is control, that religion has been used throughout history to control masses, to control the population, to urge people to do good and not give in to their baser instincts. And that, and I think Sister Paxton, she understands his message, but very clearly she still doesn't agree with him. She believes in the good that religion does. And we get another full circle moment, Chekhov's gun moment, where she still has that knife on her, and he mistakenly says the code word that Sister Barnes gave her earlier, which is magic underpants, and she slings her knife back, stabs him in the neck, and runs off. Now, she makes the classic horror mistake here of not finishing off her victim when they're in a vulnerable position, but that is just a trope of the genre. That's going to happen. I might complain about it, but it's going to happen. And then she runs upstairs. She gets into his little war room that's off to the side of the disbelief hallway. She uses a door to keep him out, to push against, she uses a table to push against the door to stop him from following her up there. And he's trapped down in the basement with his other victims that he's been controlling. He has got women down there that he says he keeps a bit hungry and a bit peckish. He gives them limited food or water because he says it makes them easier to control. It's the same thing with information. It's not just, if people are low on food and water and they're in uncomfortable situations, they're easier to control mentally, but also if you limit and control the information you give them, they're also easier to control. So a lot of what this movie is about analysis and breaking out of cycles of control. And regardless of what you believe about religion, I think you should take away a message of questioning things and take away a message of breaking out of thought patterns and breaking out of letting other people tell you what to think. Control what you think yourself. Now, where should I go next? So we're back with Sister Paxton. She's upstairs. We get my favorite shot of the movie, which is very reminiscent of shots from Hereditary, where they have a lot of model houses in that movie because the mother makes models. But in this movie, we have Mr. Reed's model of his own house, which would actually end up potentially being his own undoing here, because after we get that awesome shot where she's running up the stairs, escaping like the basement dwelling, we like zoom out. We're zooming out of the view of the real stairway, and it becomes the view of the model. And we see a little tiny version of Sister Paxton running out in the model. And then as we look up at the door, we see her come out the door actual size. So it's just such a cool creative shot, and so much fun. One of the coolest shots I've seen all year. And this movie is one of my favorite movies I've seen all year. I would, for now, I'd put it in my top 10 of the movies all year. Still a few movies yet to be seen because we're only in November. We still got 2 months. But this movie is really good, really interesting horror. Like I said, I urge you all to watch it. I do want to talk about one thing before I go, and that's the very ending of the movie. She's able to get out and escape the house, and... Oh, no, I'm sorry. Let me cut back a little bit. So she's looking for a way out of the house. She runs down the stairway again into the cellar. She's looking for something in there so that she can escape, because she checks down into the basement door again and closes it. And then boom, out of nowhere, we get one of the best jump scares of the movie. Mr. Reed's back up behind her, still bleeding out of his throat. Looks like the knife maybe went just inside where his jugular is and missed the main jugular vein it would need there for him to bleed out even a bit quicker. He slides the fully lengthened box cutter into Sister Paxton's stomach, and they've both collapsed to the ground. And now he's caressing her, holding her, and picking up the box cutter to stab her through the throat for the final blow. And just as he's about to, whack! Almost another jump scare. Sister Barnes has stood up from being dead on the ground for maybe hours. No, it couldn't have been hours at that point, but she's been dead for minutes. And she swings that 2x4, comes full circle with the nails on it, stabs it into Mr. Reed's head, and he dies, and Sister Barnes falls to the ground dead. The only remaining living member of our cast is Sister Paxton. She stands up and makes her way out of the building. She escapes out into the snow, where she falls down onto her knees, bleeding from her stomach. She holds her hand up, and we see a small butterfly land on her finger. Now, this is a callback to earlier in the movie when she said that if she was dead, she would want to come back as a butterfly, and she would land on the hand of the people she loved. And she said, not on their nose, not on their shoulder, but right on their finger, just so that they would know it was her looking after them. Now, this indicates to us as the viewer that what actually happened on screen is not the actual ending of the movie. So we have a few pieces of evidence to support this theory that Sister Paxton is actually dead at the end of the movie. And if you didn't think that watching it, I'm sorry to unveil this to you. Maybe you'll still think it even after my explanation, but let's see. So we have the evidence of her saying that when she died, she would want to turn into a butterfly, and we see the butterfly at the end, which to me indicates that she had died, passed on into that cycle, and moved on to this metaphorical butterfly that she described. But we also had a statement earlier in the movie where they talk about what people see before they die or when they die. They talk about how when Sister Barnes was young, she had cardiac death. Her heart stopped and she was revived. And she said it's common for people to see bright lights or things like their life flashing before their eyes, time slowing down, or hallucinations, people seeing God, things like that. And she says like these aren't good evidences one way or the other for or against religion, because people can hallucinate with heart death, brain death, before being revived. So it's not necessarily, it's an image projected by their brain. It may not be true. So that to me indicates that what Sister Paxton sees after she is stabbed in the stomach by Mr. Reed in the basement is a hallucination. Another piece of evidence would be that it's very unlikely / impossible that Sister Barnes would have gotten back up after such a grievous injury. I mean, we had previously seen Mr. Reed cut a hole in her arm and dig around in her arm without her moving. She was sliced across the throat and bled a dramatic amount out of her body. So it seems very impossible for her to stand up, and more likely that it was a hallucination of Sister Paxton that she stood up and saved her life. Now, Mr. Reed was also grievously wounded, so my interpretation of the end of the movie is that all three of them died. Mr. Reed, I know, despite the fact that playing God, he turned out to bleed. Do you bleed? They really went full Dawn of Justice on that one, but he died in the basement. I believe he bled out, and then Sister Barnes would have been well dead, and Sister Paxton died in the basement as well. And what she saw beyond that of escaping the house and seeing the butterfly was merely hallucination. But you can take your interpretation as you would like of the end of the movie. That's the great thing about movies like this, where they end open to interpretation. You can have your own decision of what happened for you in your own perspective. This is my perspective of what I think happened, that all three of the characters unfortunately died. But a lot of interesting messaging in this movie. Fantastic performances. Sophie Thatcher is amazing in this movie. Every second she's on screen, we have a lot of super close-ups of her and her unease and her questioning. We can read a lot across her face. And then a great turn by Chloe East showing a character maybe that is misrepresented, not intentionally misrepresented, I would say. It's intentionally misrepresented to the audience as maybe a little bit unintelligent or a little bit simple-minded, but who is unveiled to be a lot more than that in the third act of this movie. And I think she unveils that really well throughout the movie. Her character is really well developed. And then, man, the person with the most dialogue to chew on throughout this movie, Hugh Grant's Mr. Reed, is a phenomenal performance, probably quickly going into one of my favorite villains of all time. He's really amazing in this role. He performs the hell out of it. And just his voice and his intonations in his voice has this deep, somber quality, as the character's seen a lot, but he's also very perky in the show that he puts on to characters. So on the surface level, he's hiding a lot of that cynicism, pessimism I talked about, and the psychopathy with this kind of friendly, boyish demeanor of, oh, but you know what? Actually, I do have this book over in my cabinet, and take a look at this and all of my findings. He presents it in a very fun manner, but he has so much dialogue. He's so on top of it throughout this entire movie, and he does such a phenomenal job. So, like I said, if you watch this without watching the movie, you've done a little bit of a disservice to yourself, but please go and watch it. Really interesting A24 horror movie with a cool religious twist on it, and a very exciting mystery throughout with an interesting interpretive ending. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode, our first solo episode of the show. Like I said at the beginning, please make sure to comment and let us know what you thought about this concept of an episode, this solo episode. Did you like it? Did you miss Aaron? If you missed Aaron, go ahead and let us know. Oh my God, look at that. There he is. They
can't go a whole episode without me.
A little taste for you guys. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to, like I said at the beginning, hit the notification bell, the like button, the subscription button, and you can find us on everywhere you have social media platforms. You can find us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X. Make sure to go to all Spotify platforms, or I'm sorry, all podcast platforms such as Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. Make sure to leave a rating and review on there to help the show find more people. Make sure to share us with friends and family because it helps the show grow organically. And make sure to join our Discord. I always forget without Aaron how much it costs because it's free. With tax. It's
free.
Oh, okay. No, you can hear, if you hear Aaron's voice, it is absolutely free. The Discord is totally free. Make sure to jump in there and you can share your thoughts and feelings about Heretic or about anything. And you can give episode topic suggestions. Let us know in there to bring Aaron back or to do more episodes without that awful son of a... but yeah, you can give your input for the show and we'll take your critiques and suggestions. Let's see, am I missing anything else? I don't, but we do have Aaron adjacent to us in the room to say the sign off for the show. So thank you so much for watching, and that's a wrap.